Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a really fascinating stack of materials. And it's all centered on what is maybe the most ambitious goal for any language learner.
Right. That final leap.
Exactly. The leap from that advanced intermediate level, that comfortable, competent C1 level to true linguistic mastery. That often elusive C2.
It really is the critical juncture, and it's a wall that so many learners hit.
They do.
They feel like they speak English well, they rarely misunderstand things, but they still feel like they don't sound natural.
Yes, that's the word, natural.
And so this deep dive is really designed to bridge that gap. We're moving beyond just simple fluency.
Okay.
We're going to be extracting the actual linguistic techniques that give you nuance, emotional intelligence, precision, and that subtle, effortless flow.
That flow is everything.
It is.
Yeah.
It's what makes you sound less like a skilled foreign speaker and more like someone who truly, instinctively inhabits the language.
Inhabits the language. I love that phrasing. Our mission today is really to extract those key principles to get to this elite level. And this is where we stop chasing, maximum speed or memorizing these obscure textbook lists of words.
Right.
Instead, we're going to focus on how we internalize the language so deeply that it becomes automatic. We're looking for strategies that fundamentally rewire your linguistic processing.
And that leads us straight into what the sources are calling the fluency paradox.
Yes. I love this concept. I really do, because it confronts a major misconception head on.
It really does.
When people imagine C2 mastery, they often picture someone speaking at an incredible rate, maybe dropping these 50-cent hyper-academic words into every sentence.
Just to show off, right?
Exactly, just to show how much they know.
And that's the paradox. True advanced English C2 mastery is, it's rarely about performance art.
Right.
If you listen to a highly educated native speaker, they aren't trying to impress you with rarity, they're impressing you with accuracy.
With accuracy, with precision.
Exactly. It's all about precision. It's about using the right word with the right nuance at the right moment.
Okay.
It's about clarity and flow. You might not actually speak any faster than a C1 speaker.
Oh, that's interesting.
But you speak with less cognitive friction, fewer unnatural pauses, and far, far greater accuracy in conveying complex, layered meaning.
So it's less about knowing 100 rare words and far more about deploying, say, the 1,000 most common words, but with flawless structural precision.
And deep emotional context.
Yeah.
That's the other piece.
Right. We're talking about the ability to handle conversations about complex societal issues or, abstract philosophies.
Deep emotional experiences.
Yes. And doing it without stumbling over the necessary connectors or qualifiers or the rhetorical structures you need.
That right there, that is the C2 benchmark. And that's
Yeah.
going to be the focus of our deep dive today.
Okay, so let's unpack the foundation of this. If mastery isn't about sitting down for one, grueling 10-hour study session every weekend, what does the learning process actually need to look like?
It's a great question.
Our sources point really strongly toward consistent reinforcement of habits.
Yes. And crucially, moving away from conscious translation.
That's the big one.
Absolutely. The foundation has to be automaticity. If you are constantly thinking, okay, how do I conjugate this verb? Or wait, what's that connective phrase in English? Then you are still firmly in that intermediate bracket.
Right. You're still calculating.
You're calculating.
Yeah.
C2 requires instantaneous, almost reflex-like retrieval of structure and high-frequency phrases. We need to completely eliminate that delay.
Okay, so let's start with the habits then. Section 1.1, the power of micro-habits, passive osmosis.
Right.
This core concept, it's drawn heavily from language acquisition research, and it's fascinating. It basically says that consistent, tiny bits of exposure
Even just short bursts.
are far more effective for getting to C2 than those long, grueling study sessions.
That's so true.
So tell us about this mechanism. Why does passive osmosis, as the sources call it, work so well?
Passive osmosis is essentially leveraging context and repetition. Wow, and this is the key part, bypassing the high-anxiety analytical part of your brain.
Okay.
When you do what's called massed practice, a long session once a week, you just overwhelm your cognitive load.
Too much at once.
Way too much.
Yeah.
Your brain, under fatigue and stress, actually inhibits retention. It's a survival mechanism. You might feel productive for those 8 hours.
Right, because you're exhausted.
Exactly. But the actual synaptic connections needed for language recall, they're fleeting.
So the brain is treating that massive data dump of language like, a threat or an emergency, and most of it just spills right back out.
Precisely. Now, you compare that to spaced repetition, that steady, small drip feed we call a microhabit.
Okay.
If you introduce some high-level input for just 15 minutes while you're doing the dishes, and then maybe again for 15 minutes on your commute,
And another 15 before bed.
you are leveraging the brain's natural mechanisms for building long-term memories.
Right.
The language data is seen more like environmental background noise. It's something consistent that the brain just naturally integrates, and that leads to true internalization.
I really like that analogy of the steady drip versus the massive bucket. It feels like it's about lowering the barrier to entry for learning.
Yes.
It feels less like studying and more like just living your life, but in the language.
And that feeling is so crucial because it reduces performance anxiety. The C2 learner isn't sitting down to study grammar rules.
Right.
They're analyzing complex arguments in a podcast. If they're doing this while cooking, their primary focus is the recipe.
Which means their analytical brain is distracted.
It is. And that allows the linguistic structure to flow more directly into the subconscious. This is how you develop real linguistic intuition.
So what are some of the most actionable examples for building mastery through these micro habits? Beyond just listening to a deep dive like this one, what specific actions can you take today?
The key is high-quality input during what you might call low-quality attention periods.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
So if you listen to a deep dive while you're out for a walk, you're absorbing high-level vocabulary, complex syntax, advanced argumentation patterns. But critically, you are also internalizing the natural pacing and the rhythm of sophisticated English conversation. And that rhythmic flow is so often what separates C1 from C2.
And the sources also really emphasize the power of monologuing, specifically just talking to yourself while you're driving or cooking.
Yes.
It might feel a bit awkward at first, but it seems like a genius way to practice production without any of that performance anxiety.
It's vital. I can't stress this enough, especially for production automaticity. You're forced to narrate your current environment or your complex thoughts using only English.
Right.
So you might be driving and trying to describe a complicated traffic maneuver. You might think to yourself, okay, the driver in front of me hesitated for a considerable amount of time before finally indicating their intention to merge.
And in that internal struggle, you immediately realize where your linguistic gaps are. You might find yourself pausing, struggling for the word hesitated.
Or the phrase indicating their intention.
Exactly.
And that's the point. This is low-stakes production practice, but it's incredibly effective because that moment of difficulty is immediately followed by self-correction.
Which reinforces the correct pattern.
Yes, this consistent daily repetition of self-correction is essential for embedding language patterns deeply enough to get that C2 automaticity. If you only correct yourself in a stressful class setting once a week, the pattern just doesn't stick.
This all moves us seamlessly into that ultimate C2 benchmark, which is stopping the translation cycle.
The big one.
If you're still mentally going from your native language to English before you speak, you're just spending cognitive energy you don't need to spend.
It's the difference between calculation and reflex, like we said earlier. When a native speaker hears a complex idea, they process the idea and articulate the English response. Well, simultaneously.
There's no translation step.
None. C2 fluency means you've achieved automatic triggering. Common, functional, or even complex phrases just trigger instantaneously without any conscious effort.
So the goal is to free up all that cognitive power we're currently spending on translating basic structures and functional phrases and reserve that mental energy for the actual complex thought and the nuance we want to express.
That is the true cognitive benefit of automaticity. You can think of it like a computer processor.
Okay.
If the baseline linguistic operations generating verb tenses, constructing clauses, that kind of thing, are consuming, say, 80% of your CPU.
You have almost no power left.
Exactly. You have virtually no remaining power to articulate an original, nuanced, or abstract idea spontaneously.
And that perfectly explains that C1 phenomenon, where a speaker can understand everything perfectly, but they struggle to contribute meaningfully to a fast-paced, complex conversation.
Yes. By automating those linguistic reflexes, you bring that basic structural consumption down to maybe 10%.
Which leaves 90% for the real work.
Yes, for articulation, for spontaneous reflection, for managing the conversation dynamics, and for interpreting the emotional subtext of what the other person is saying.
So what are some of those specific high-frequency, complex phrases, the sources call them linguistic scaffolding, that have to become automatic responses?
We need to automate all the functional, organizational, and qualifying phrases. If you have to pause to generate these, you lose the conversational rhythm completely.
So beyond the classic examples, like replacing often with the more sophisticated on a regular basis?
Or I think with, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. What else should we be focusing on?
We need to focus on complex qualifiers and transitions. Think about setting conditions or qualifications.
Give us some examples.
Okay, a phrase like, be that as it may. It's a highly sophisticated way to acknowledge a point while immediately introducing a counterargument.
I see.
Or having said that, which does a similar thing. It lets you pivot smoothly. For organizing your thoughts, you need phrases like to put it into perspective or from a structural standpoint.
And these aren't just fancy vocabulary.
Not at all. They are functional tools that organize complex arguments efficiently and elegantly. They're not filler. They signal intellectual maturity. They tell the listener you are processing multiple variables at once.
So what's the strategy for internalizing them? How do you make them automatic?
The strategy is conscious substitution. It's very deliberate. For the next week, every single time you would naturally say, I think, you must force yourself to say, as far as I'm concerned.
That sounds strenuous at first.
It is. But it's critical for moving those patterns from your slow analytical memory bank into the fast automatic reflex center. You're deliberately replacing the simple intermediate structure with the sophisticated C2-1 through high-frequency repetition.
This is where we dive into the actual architecture of advanced fluency. The sources really emphasize structures that provide this inherent rhythm and balance. Specifically, they talk about correlative conjunctions, and they use the more as the prime example. Why is that specific construction such a hallmark of mastery?
Because it demonstrates exceptional rhetorical and structural control. The more structure establishes perfect parallelism, and it shows cause and effect so efficiently and elegantly.
Right.
It signals an advanced comprehension of English flow because it avoids several common C1 structural pitfalls.
And what are those pitfalls? I mean, why is this better than just a simple if A then B construction?
Well, if you use if A then B, or simple conjunctions like because or so, you risk creating a run-on sentence or a series of really simplistic declarative clauses.
Which is a hallmark of that B-level articulation.
Exactly. But the more structure, it functions as a correlative conjunction, so it naturally forces the speaker to balance the grammatical weight of both clauses.
It's like a linguistic seesaw. You have to make sure the structure on both sides is symmetrical for the statement to really land with that rhythmic balance.
Precisely. That structural symmetry is what signals sophisticated articulation. It avoids clunky adverbs or excessive subordinate clauses that might just confuse the listener. It's direct, it's proportional, and it's inherently rhythmic. It provides a natural cadence that native speakers instinctively recognize as advanced.
Let's look at the source examples and maybe break down their linguistic components a bit more.
Okay, consider the first one. The more I practice, the more confident I feel.
Simple enough.
Simple, but linguistically, we see two parallel comparative clauses. The verb tenses are perfectly matched, and the sentence achieves maximum impact in minimal time. It's incredibly efficient. You're conveying a continuous proportional relationship instantly.
And the second example is very relevant to what we're talking about. The more I expose myself to natural dialogue, the less I rely on subtitles.
This one is excellent because it demonstrates how to manage complexity within the same structure. We're using the less instead of the more, which shows flexibility to express an inverse proportion. If you can integrate this structure naturally into your spontaneous speech, you're showcasing a really high level of linguistic control. You've mastered the architecture you need to convey complex logical linkage without sounding robotic or using fragmented sentences.
It seems like a foundational skill for any kind of high-level argumentation. If you're in a professional meeting and you need to argue for, say, increased investment, you could say something like, the more resources we allocate to R&D now, the sooner we will see exponential returns in market share.
That's a perfect example.
It just frames the argument with this undeniable structural logic.
It does. And that example shows the practical application perfectly. It uses sophisticated, slightly abstract vocabulary, allocate, exponential returns, but it's wrapped in a structurally flawless C2 framework. Mastering this allows you to convey not just facts, but real rhetorical force.
Okay, so we've established the internal habits required for C2. Now let's shift our focus to external communication.
Right.
Specifically, let's address the challenges of achieving precision in, well, the digital world we all live in now.
This is a massive challenge for modern C2 learners. A huge one.
Yeah.
They're often interacting in professional or academic settings where communication demands nuance and precision. But their daily digital environment encourages the exact opposite. It encourages linguistic shortcuts.
So the sources acknowledge this inherent contradiction. Technology connects us instantly, globally, but the depth of that communication often suffers.
That is the communication challenge we have to overcome. The connectivity is undeniable. But the dominant modes of digital exchange, text messages, short emails, social media comments, they all rely so heavily on shorthand.
And fragmentation.
And low context signaling, like emojis. Conversations can become superficial because they favor speed over articulation.
So if we're relying on shorthand in our texts, how exactly does that undermine the C2 requirement for clear, precise articulation when we're speaking or writing formally?
Because it fundamentally weakens our ability to articulate reasoning and our ability to use subordinate clauses. If you just use an emoji to communicate, "I am very annoyed," you gain speed, sure, but you lose the practice of articulating the why.
You lose the need to build the sentence.
Exactly. You lose the structural requirement to formulate. I am annoyed because the system failed to account for the necessary variables, which resulted in an avoidable delay.
That is a fascinating distinction. The C2 requirement is to move beyond that low context signal like dropping a thumbs up emoji to a high context explanation.
Yes, articulating the why using complete structurally sound sentences that incorporate multiple factors. We have to actively fight the gravitational pull towards the linguistic laziness that digital tools encourage.
And when you're forced to explain your stance on complex topics like ethical AI or an international trade,
the listener needs to understand all the intricate factors that are influencing your view. That level of discourse demands advanced linguistic architecture, the ability to use relative clauses, conditional clauses, and subordinate conjunctions seamlessly.
So if a C1 speaker might say, technology is good, we connect with people, the C2 speaker has to be ready to articulate something more like.
Well, technology indisputably accelerates global connection. Its pervasive nature inadvertently introduces complexities regarding privacy and deepens the potential for social fragmentation.
Wow! You nailed the difference right there. The C1 speaker gives two simple declarative statements.
Right.
The C2 speaker wraps the entire argument, the pros and the cons, into one structurally mature sentence that demonstrates synthesized thought.
And that brings us directly to the idea of structural balance.
Right. So how does an advanced speaker use this linguistic architecture to convey nuance, especially when dealing with those complex, multifaceted issues that define C2 discourse?
Sophisticated articulation demands that you acknowledge complexity immediately. If you speak exclusively in definitive terms, it is good, it is bad. You just sound simplistic.
Right. You sound like you haven't thought about it enough.
Exactly. A C2 speaker demonstrates intellectual balance by acknowledging multiple, often conflicting perspectives at the same time. And the structure of the sentence itself is the key signal here.
It is. The structural markers are like flashing lights that indicate intellectual maturity. Let's reanalyze that key example from the source material. While technology facilitates connection, it can inadvertently erode the depth of our face-to-face interactions.
The power is all in that opening qualifier, while.
Yes.
It immediately signals to the listener that you're about to present a balanced argument. It sets up a rhetorical contrast between a positive and a negative outcome of the same phenomenon.
So the structure itself acts as a sophisticated rhetorical device. The sources called it an antithesis.
That's right. By using structural contrast phrases like while, though, although, or on the other hand, you show confidence and balance in your argument. This is absolutely essential for C2 mastery.
So you're not just stating your view.
No. You are preemptively addressing the inherent complexity and the potential counterarguments within the very same sentence structure.
This is incredibly useful in professional settings. If you're presenting a new proposal, for example,
Go on.
you could say, while the initial capital expenditure is substantial, the long-term operational savings definitively outweigh the upfront cost. You show you've considered the drawback before you even get to the advantage.
That's it. It shows the audience that you have internalized the complexity of the decision. The key takeaway here is that mastery is demonstrated not just by what you say, but by the structural maturity you use to deliver it. You're communicating that you've synthesized the complexity, rather than just choosing one simplistic side.
We've talked a lot about production speaking and writing with precision, But true C2 fluency requires equally strong reception skills.
Yes, it does.
We're moving into the realm of what the sources call the social glue of communication.
This is, frankly, the most overlooked component in C2 language assessment. Oh, absolutely. Many learners drill vocabulary and structure, but they rarely practice listening actively and empathetically. Speaking is only half the equation at these advanced levels.
The other half is that sophisticated, responsive interaction.
Exactly. So let's emphasize active listening. If you are C2, you should be able to process linguistic information seamlessly. Therefore, your cognitive focus should shift entirely away from linguistic processing. What did they just say?
And towards emotional and contextual comprehension. Why did they say it that way?
Precisely. If you're at a C1 level, you are often still just listening to reply. You're waiting for the speaker to finish so you can quickly retrieve and deliver your own pre-planned response.
Especially if it's a topic you've anticipated.
Yes. And when you're just listening to reply, what happens?
You miss the subtext.
You miss the subtext entirely. True fluency involves reading between the lines, understanding the tone, the subtle hesitation, the body language, and the underlying emotion that might actually contradict the literal words being spoken.
So the C2 speaker is more like a linguistic detective.
I like that. They're analyzing not just the semantic content, but the emotional register and the social intent behind it.
That is a profound difference. An intermediate speaker hears the words and translates them.
Right.
The C2 speaker processes the words automatically and focuses all that freed up cognitive energy on the context and the emotional weight.
And this requires deep cognitive focus, which, again, is only possible if you've achieved that automaticity in production.
Because if you're still scrambling for the right past participle,
you simply won't have the bandwidth to register the subtle sadness in the speaker's voice when they describe a recent career change. You'll just hear the words.
Okay, so if we've listened actively and we've understood the emotional landscape, how do we then use C2 level language to construct an empathetic response?
One that validates the speaker's experience.
Exactly. Let's contrast the basic versus the advanced using a common emotional statement.
Okay, imagine a colleague says to you, "I've been feeling a bit overwhelmed lately by the combination of projects."
The sources note that the basic C1 response is often just a short transactional affirmation, something like, "Oh, okay," or "That sounds tough."
Right. It validates the information, but it fails to validate the deep emotion behind it.
So what's the advanced empathetic response?
Well, it has to show engagement and validation through a more sophisticated linguistic structure. The source example is powerful. I'm sorry to hear that. Is it work-related or just life in general?
Let's analyze why that specific response is C2 level. What's it doing?
It's a multi-layered response. First, it acknowledges the feeling immediately. I'm sorry to hear that. It uses appropriate emotional phrasing.
Okay.
Second, and this is important, it shows genuine interest by offering a categorical inquiry. Is it work-related or just life in general?
It's an invitation.
It's a very specific invitation. That categorized question invites the speaker to elaborate further, and it signals to them that you are prepared to engage in a deeper, more personal conversation. This is the definition of sophisticated rapport building.
And what about specific phrases that act as linguistic anchors? Things that validate the speaker's experience and establish connection.
We need to move beyond just saying, "me too." We need phrases that personalize the connection while using strong, evocative language.
For example?
Try. I can relate to that. I've definitely been in a similar boat. It uses a natural idiom and personalizes the experience. Or, when someone describes a really tough problem, use language that validates the effort they're putting in.
Like?
That must be incredibly draining. How are you managing to keep it all together?
The word draining is very evocative.
It is. It's strong vocabulary that resonates emotionally. It shows you understand the weight of their situation.
So beyond empathy, there are these other subtle conversational markers. The verbal tics, fillers, and flow mechanisms that make a speaker sound truly natural and human. The conversational lubricant, as we called it.
Yes. These are the small phrases that lubricate the conversation and prevent those abrupt, textbook-like transitions. For instance, think about acknowledging surprise. A learner might just say, "I am surprised by that information," which is correct, but
A bit robotic.
a bit. A natural speaker would incorporate a more visceral, natural phrase like, "That caught me off guard," or "I wasn't expecting that to be the case."
These phrases are more dynamic. They communicate the surprise with a sense of immediate, almost physical reaction.
Exactly. And then there are the glue phrases. These are the crucial markers used to affirm a speaker while simultaneously maintaining your own unique separate perspective.
This is the high-wire act of C2 social interaction, isn't it?
It really is. It's key for navigating group discussions and maintaining conversational harmony without being overly submissive.
Give us the defining example from the source material.
The one we analyzed earlier is just so crucial. I wouldn't go that far, but I see your point.
That structure is masterful. It's a masterclass in professional disagreement.
It is, because it grants immediate validation. I see your point. While at the same time establishing a clear intellectual boundary. I wouldn't go that far.
It's the difference between rejection and refinement.
That's a great way to put it. You're telling the speaker, I appreciate the validity of your premise, but my conclusion diverges slightly. These small conversational markers add humanity and depth that you just don't get from a textbook.
They allow you to hold a nuanced view without dismissing the other person.
Which is the definition of sophisticated, advanced social interaction in English. They show that your opinion is measured and thoughtfully considered, not just a knee-jerk reaction.
Okay, we're now moving to the domain of polite conflict, navigating professional, academic, or high-level social disagreement.
This is critical.
Because if you can't disagree politely, you can't truly operate at a C2 level in any kind of high-stakes environment.
Not at all. In academic panels, in business negotiations, informal debates, disagreement is inevitable. But how you handle it defines your professional polish and your C2 standing.
A C1 speaker might be grammatically correct,
but socially abrasive. And that can be a career-limiting move.
Right, so cultural context is key here. In many English-speaking professional environments, direct disagreement is seen as rude or aggressive or confrontational.
It is. And advanced English requires a specific repertoire of what we call softeners. You have to avoid the abrasive trap.
So the difference between saying, you are wrong, that proposal will fail.
Which is blunt, definitive, and feels like a personal challenge.
And using these polite structures is immense.
It's night and day. Softeners insulate your divergence of opinion from being perceived as a personal attack. They allow the focus to remain purely on the idea, not the person. They prioritize maintaining the relationship over winning the point instantly.
Let's detail the exact softeners that the sources provided and analyze why they work, both culturally and psychologically.
Okay, the first one works through a structure of affirmation followed by reservation. I see your point, but I'm not completely convinced.
So why is that one so effective?
Well, you're starting with the word I, so you're taking ownership of your own skepticism rather than projecting error onto them. You validate their right to have a perspective. I see your point. Before you introduce your own internal caveat, I'm not completely convinced. You're shifting the burden of proof back onto the idea, not the person.
Okay. A structural cousin to that is... That's an interesting perspective, though I'd interpret it slightly differently.
Yes. Notice the compliment at the beginning. Interesting perspective. You are acknowledging the intellectual effort they put in, which makes the following disagreement much more palatable.
And the phrase slightly differently is key.
It's so key. It softens the degree of divergence. It suggests a modification rather than an outright rejection of their idea.
And then for a more formal, highly professional setting, we have the most balanced option. I respect your opinion, but I have a slightly different take on the matter.
This is pure professionalism. I respect your opinion is explicit relationship maintenance. It ensures the other person feels heard and valued, which is paramount in collaborative environments. Then, framing your view as a slightly different take on the matter positions your idea as an addition to the conversation, not a demolition of theirs.
So the repeated pattern is crucial for C2. Validate the speaker's authority or their effort first, and then introduce your counterview gently using self-referential language. I'm not convinced. I'd interpret it.
Always. The goal is always to demonstrate confidence in your analysis without projecting arrogance or certainty where it isn't warranted. These phrases elevate the debate from a personal confrontation to a purely intellectual exchange focused on adding nuance.
So if C2 mastery is about handling complexity, we also need specific linguistic tools to express that life or policy or academic issues just aren't black and white.
Right. How do we linguistically communicate that an issue has many moving parts?
Because an intermediate speaker might accidentally try to oversimplify the issue for the sake of clarity.
Which can make them sound naive. An advanced speaker signals that simplification is impossible and that the listener needs to prepare for nuance.
So what are the expressions we use to communicate this necessary layer of complexity?
They're powerful, almost managerial cues. Phrases like, it's a bit more complicated than it seems.
I like that.
It's a polite warning to the listener. It says, we are entering a high complexity zone here, and simple solutions won't suffice. It immediately manages expectations.
And the second example is more prescriptive. It tells the listener exactly how the speaker is approaching the problem.
Yes, there are several factors to consider. This tells the listener that you, the speaker, are approaching this issue systematically.
Right.
You're synthesizing multiple variables: political, economic, social, historical, all at once.
So these phrases are really just shorthand for advanced critical thought.
They are, and they're essential when you're navigating high-level academic or professional discourse because they demonstrate a systemic understanding of the issue at hand.
For instance, if you were discussing a change in the global supply chain, you wouldn't just blame one country. You'd introduce the complexity by saying something like, well, we have to weigh the environmental cost, the geopolitical instability, and the projected consumer behavior. There are several factors to consider before we decide on a definitive path.
That example wraps three distinct, complex elements into a single, succinct, structurally mature statement. That capacity for efficient and organized complexity is pure C2.
We've covered structure, habit, and social interaction. Now let's talk about, I guess, the soul of C2 mastery, using reflective language to articulate personal growth, identity, and emotional maturity.
This is where it gets deep.
It is. This is where the learner truly starts to use English not just as a tool, but as a medium for self-expression.
I agree. True C2 mastery means you can present your own identity through narrative, not just by listing facts. The deepest measure of fluency is the ability to articulate your inner life with the same precision and nuance that you use to articulate, say, an economic policy.
So the C2 storytelling standard requires a speaker to tell a story about their past that doesn't just narrate events,
but explains their identity today. It requires reflection, not simple chronological recitation.
Let's draw that stark contrast. A C1 speaker might say, I moved abroad when I was 22, and then I found a new job.
A recitation of facts.
Right. What's the C2 version?
The reflective insight required for C2 is something like, looking back, I realized that the pressure of moving abroad at 22 fundamentally shaped my resilience and forced me to develop a sense of self-reliance I didn't even know I possessed.
Wow. The second statement is exponentially more complex.
It is.
Because it involves interpreting a past event through the lens of your present mature understanding. It demands not just grammatical command, all the subordinating clauses and modal verbs, but emotional maturity.
The language reflects the internal process. You are moving from the factual domain, I move, to the interpretive, analytical domain. I realize that X fundamentally shapes Y.
It demonstrates the capacity for introspection and thematic interpretation,
which is a key element of high-level personal communication. And it means the C2 speaker needs the vocabulary to discuss abstract qualities like resilience, self-reliance, intellectual curiosity, vulnerability.
So if you can only say, I am a strong person, you're still limited.
Exactly. But if you can articulate that period fostered an unforeseen level of psychological resilience, you are operating at C2.
So how do we cue the listener that we're shifting from simple narration to this profound reflective analysis? What are the key transitional tools?
These phrases are so vital because they signal that the speaker is about to provide an insight based on the passage of time or a shift in understanding. They bridge the gap between the historical moment and the contemporary realization.
And the classic reflective posture is established instantly with the phrase, in hindsight.
That immediately establishes a sophisticated reflective posture. Other key phrases include, if I could do it over again, which signals a hypothetical but instructional analysis.
Or, it was a turning point for me.
Yes. That one elevates a simple event, like leaving a toxic job, into a pivotal moment of personal transformation. It frames it dramatically for the listener.
We can also use phrases that show a kind of delayed understanding, like, only much later did I grasp the full gravity of the situation.
That's an excellent example. It uses inverted word order for dramatic effect, placing the emphasis not on the action, but on the intellectual and emotional delay. That shows a real mastery of structural variation.
So these transitional phrases are like signposts, guiding the listener through your deeper, more meaningful personal journey.
Precisely.
Let's break down the successful structure for describing a personal challenge using the template provided in the sources. This seems to be an architectural approach to sophisticated emotional storytelling.
This narrative structure is highly effective because it resolves tension, provides a clear arc of growth, and delivers a profound lesson. It has three distinct required parts that need to be linguistically differentiated.
Okay, so first, we have the struggle. How is that typically framed with C2 language?
It's framed from the past, emotional perspective. The statement has to validate the past struggle while implying that it was transient. For example, at the time, it felt like an insurmountable setback.
Notice the use of the word felt.
Yes, it prioritizes the subjective emotion of that moment. And insurmountable setback is great high-level vocabulary for failure.
Then comes the realization, or as the sources call it, the pivot. This is the critical moment where the narrative shifts from passive suffering to active learning or choice.
And this is where we introduce the growth, often with a structural contrast. But eventually I realized it wasn't a failure, it was a necessary pivot.
A necessary pivot is fantastic vocabulary.
It's so good. It implies that the setback wasn't just some random failure, but a strategic redirection that was mandated by circumstance. It reframes the negative as a prerequisite for growth.
And finally, the lesson learned. This connects the story back to the speaker's present identity using a universal insight.
Right. That experience fundamentally taught me that true growth often happens outside of our comfort zone, necessitating a degree of calculated risk. This final piece has to offer a universal, insightful takeaway that justifies the entire narrative.
Struggle, pivot, lesson.
That entire structure shows deep linguistic, rhetorical, and emotional command.
We established earlier that C2 is not about linguistic perfection. It's about authenticity and maturity.
Yes.
And that includes being able to express when you don't have all the answers, avoiding that pretense of omniscience.
It takes real maturity and confidence to admit uncertainty, and it avoids the intellectual arrogance that can sometimes accompany high fluency. When you can articulate your indecision clearly and specifically, it demonstrates a high degree of emotional self-awareness.
Which is essential for high-level interaction.
It is.
So what are the specific phrases we use to communicate internal conflict or indecision?
For internal conflict, we need phrases that accurately describe that mental state of deadlock. You could use, "I'm torn between two choices," or "I am grappling with the potential ramifications of both paths."
The verb grappling is very sophisticated there.
It is. It suggests a real struggle. And for communicating cautious hope or measured optimism, which avoids both simple enthusiasm and bleak pessimism.
We use, "I'm cautiously optimistic."
Exactly. It demonstrates risk assessment and measured hope. For a slightly stronger commitment, you could say, "I have high hopes, provided we can mitigate the primary risks."
It shows you're hopeful, but you also understand that obstacles remain.
Which makes it a highly nuanced C2 level expression of commitment. These phrases are crucial because they communicate that the speaker is a thinking, reflective human being dealing with real-world complexity, not just a walking textbook.
This has been a truly extensive deep dive into the architecture of C2 mastery. To synthesize, we covered that critical shift from one-off learning to consistent daily micro-habits, that passive osmosis approach.
We did. We also emphasized the necessity of moving from mental translation to a linguistic reflex.
We talked about the importance of structural balance in modern, complex communication and the absolute requirement for that social glue of empathetic listening.
We also focused heavily on the mechanics of sophisticated interaction, mastering the art of polite disagreement through softeners, communicating multi-factor issues with organizational precision.
And finally, using reflective language to articulate deep personal growth and emotional maturity through narrative. And remember that core insight about consistency. Fluency isn't built in a single marathon study session.
No.
It's built through that consistent small exposure. That rhythmic structure we analyzed earlier, it applies to your learning process too.
Yeah.
The more consistently you expose yourself to high-level language, the more automatic and natural it becomes.
And if there's one definitive takeaway we want to leave you with, it's this. Advanced English is fundamentally not about linguistic perfection or avoiding mistakes. It is about connection. It's about ensuring that your true self, your humor, your nuanced empathy, your deepest intelligence, can be fully expressed in a second language without the friction of conscious translation. Your goal is to eliminate that friction.
So, as you continue your practice, leverage that concept of automaticity. Imagine yourself in these complex conversations, in a panel discussion, arguing a policy point, or sharing a profound personal story.
Talk to yourself while you're cooking or driving.
Yes, force yourself to articulate nuance using those advanced structures. Consciously substitute the C1 phrase with the C2 alternative.
Keep learning, keep growing. You are closer to mastery than you think, provided you maintain that consistency and shift your focus from correctness to conversational sophistication.
And finally, a provocative thought for you to consider as you reflect on this deep dive.
Okay.
If C2 mastery is truly about articulating emotional depth and nuance, consider this. How much of your current native language communication relies on the very shorthand, the emojis, and the fragmentation that advanced English demands you move beyond?
That's a great question.
What stories are you waiting to tell in English that reflect a necessary pivot or a fundamental realization in your life? And do you currently have the reflective vocabulary to do them justice right now?
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into mastery.
We look forward to synthesizing more of your materials soon.
Welcome back to the deep dive. If you are here, it's probably because you're not satisfied with, just basic fluency.
Right.
You're operating at a level where the only things left to really master are the nuances, the psychology, the subtext, and that sheer sophistication that separates a competent speaker from a truly, truly impactful one.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And our mission today is, well, it's a bit of a high-altitude extraction. We've distilled a whole stack of sources that are focused on that C2 level, on professional deployment, and the kind of complex expression you need to function fully.
And not just linguistically, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Culturally, emotionally, all of it, in these advanced English environments.
We are, I think, fundamentally shifting the scope of analysis here. We're moving beyond those prescriptive rules about, how to construct a perfect sentence. And we're moving into the descriptive rules about how to deploy your personality, how to argue strategically, and manage relationships with real depth.
It's that transition, isn't it, from how to learn the language to how to exist fully within that language setting.
Exactly.
And for the sophisticated learner, this is the most valuable knowledge there is. True mastery isn't just about parsing the dictionary meaning of a word.
No.
It is about recognizing the subtext, understanding the emotional infrastructure, and internalizing the cultural assumptions that dictate when and why a certain phrase is used.
So what we're doing is arming you, the listener, with those crucial insights.
Yes. The insights that connect that deep psychological context to your real-time verbal choices.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's an enormous topic, and I think we should start where many advanced speakers feel the greatest friction, this feeling that their personality just doesn't quite translate. We're calling this the identity gap, and it's almost universal among high-level learners, isn't it?
It really is.
You're witty, you're sharp, maybe a little sarcastic, and you're definitely expressive in your native tongue. But then the moment you switch to English, it's like a different persona takes over.
A much more serious one.
Yes. Overly formal, stiff. It's the imposter syndrome of language learning,
Yeah.
where you feel like a lesser version of yourself.
And it's not just a feeling, it's actually a reality that's rooted in cognitive load. Think about it.
Okay.
When you're operating in a second language, your brain is prioritizing accuracy. It's prioritizing retrieval. And that means you often just can't access the full spectrum of your personality lexicon quickly enough.
So the humor, the subtle irony.
All of that, the layered emotional responses, they get left behind. And the language you end up using becomes, transactional rather than relational.
That is precisely the friction. You know what you're capable of, but you lack the fluency to project it.
Yeah.
And that internal contradiction, it leads to this deep, almost corrosive frustration.
The feeling that you are constantly misrepresenting yourself.
Yes.
And here's the solution that the sources offer. Achieving authentic self-expression isn't just about, learning more colorful adjectives.
Well, it's not a vocabulary problem.
It's not. It's about being deliberate. It's about using phrases that signal who you are, your core values, your inner self, not just what you know grammatically. You have to frame the conversation around your personality right from the very beginning.
That's a fascinating strategy. Linguistic preemptive framing. So instead of waiting for the conversation to hopefully reveal your personality, you just introduce it yourself.
You introduce it.
So what do these introspective openers actually look like in practice?
They're essentially statements of self-definition. They offer context for everything that you're about to say afterwards. We often fail to recognize that native speakers do this constantly without thinking.
Oh, that's interesting.
They pepper conversation with these implied values. But for the C2 learner, we need to make it explicit. So for instance, rather than just stating an opinion on, say, a political issue.
You frame it first.
You frame it. You frame your subsequent analysis by starting with a core value statement.
Okay, give us some of the examples the sources highlighted.
One of the best ones is this. I've always been the kind of person who values honesty.
Ah, okay.
Now, if you use that phrase, the listener immediately understands that your subsequent critique, even if it's sharp, is coming from a place of integrity, not from a place of malice.
That completely reframes the entire interaction. Or what if you need to explain why you sometimes need to step away from the group? You know, in a high-pressure team.
Then you can use a statement that manages their expectations, something like, one thing people often misunderstand about me is my need for quiet time.
I see. So you're giving them a lens through which to view your actions.
Precisely. What's so compelling about these structures is their function. They are not just informational. They are tools for setting relational expectations.
So if you signal that you value quiet time,
then the team interprets your periodic withdrawal not as rudeness, not as disinterest, but as a necessary part of your process. You are essentially providing the user manual for interacting with you.
But I have to ask, doesn't using too much of this framing language risk making you sound, I don't know, a bit pompous or maybe overly cautious? We need to know where that line is.
That's a critical question. And the key is, as with most things, balance and authenticity.
Right.
If these statements are deployed strategically, say at the start of a relationship or a new project, maybe once every few months, they serve their function beautifully. If you use them every single day,
It becomes a crutch.
it becomes a conversational crutch, or even worse, it sounds like some overly rehearsed presentation. The goal is just to integrate these signals naturally, especially when your personality is most at risk of being misread.
That context is everything. And context brings us directly to the massive impact of culture and environment on communication style.
Huge.
You could master every word on the TOEFL, but you could still cause incredible confusion if you miss the cultural nuance, especially around sensitive topics like, say, refusal.
Indeed. And we absolutely have to discuss the contrast between high context and direct or low context cultures. This dictates the literal structure of communication at an advanced level.
Okay, so high context first.
High context communication, which is prevalent in many Asian or Latin cultures, relies so heavily on implied meaning, on shared history, on nonverbal cues. The words themselves actually carry less weight than the relationship infrastructure.
So if a professional in a high context environment needs to politely refuse a request or, avoid an uncomfortable topic, their priority is saving face.
Both their own and the other person's.
Over efficiency.
Absolutely. The refusal has to be cushioned extensively. In these cultures, a direct no can feel like a relationship rupture. So to politely decline, they might use something very gentle, very indirect.
Like what?
Like, I'd rather not talk about that right now. And that's often followed by extensive apologies or a quick redirection of the conversation. The subtext is crystal clear, but the surface language is highly accommodating.
Okay, now let's contrast that with the direct cultures. The sources point to the US, Germany, parts of Northern Europe as low context examples.
In these direct cultures, the primary value is, it's speed, it's clarity, and often legal defensibility. Relationships are important, of course, but communication is frequently transactional and explicit.
So there's less need to cushion things.
Much less. If you don't want to discuss something, the expectation is efficiency. So the response is stripped down to the pragmatic essential. That's private, or I am unable to commit to that timeline.
And no lengthy apology is needed.
No, and in fact, sometimes offering one is seen as wasting time or even signaling a kind of weakness.
The C2 skill, then, is truly profound. It isn't just about knowing that both I'd rather not talk about that and that's private exist. It's the ability to choose the appropriate statement for the specific social setting.
Exactly.
Are you talking to a direct colleague in a New York office or a relationship-focused partner in, say, a Korean venture?
Precisely. It's the high-level synthesis of linguistic knowledge and sociological acuity. It's that skill of reading the room and deploying the specific language infrastructure that the room demands.
And that is what separates the speaker, who is just functional, from the one who truly belongs.
This need to read the room leads us perfectly into the domain of advanced English subtext. I think once a speaker is highly fluent, they start to realize that in most native-level interactions,
especially about uncomfortable topics.
Yes, especially concerning uncomfortable, sensitive, or professional topics, speakers rarely say exactly what they mean. The real meaning, it lives just beneath the surface.
Subtext. It's the linguistic layer where ambiguity becomes a tool for social management.
A tool, that's a good way to put it.
And if you only operate on the literal meaning of the words, you'll constantly misunderstand intent, you'll miss veiled criticism, and you'll completely fail to recognize a polite refusal. We're talking about mastering the subtle code of soft rejection and ambiguous replies.
Let's dedicate some serious analytical time to this, starting with the most common soft rejection phrase. Imagine you invite a potential collaborator to an unexpected last-minute meeting.
Or a big social event.
Right. And their reply is, "I'll think about it." Or the slightly more active version, "I'll see what I can do."
Okay, so the literal meaning is, I am currently considering the feasibility of attending.
That's the literal meaning.
But the pragmatic C2 level meaning is almost universally no.
Almost always. But why? Why is this the case?
Because if they genuinely wanted to come, or if they were seriously considering it, they would usually follow up with a logistical question.
Exactly. They'd ask, when exactly is it, or who else will be there? The absence of any follow-up inquiry, combined with that ambiguous phrase, strongly signals a polite, face-saving rejection.
So they're prioritizing preserving the relationship.
Over giving a quick, accurate, logistical update.
Yeah.
Yes.
And crucially, the high-level listener understands that no follow-up is required from their end either. If you press them, you risk violating the social contract of the soft rejection.
You do. It's designed to let both parties move on gracefully.
You're breaking the code if you push.
You are. The function of that phrase is not to inform you of their schedule, it's to manage your expectation and preserve social harmony. The fact that the literal meaning is completely overridden by the social context, that is the hallmark of advanced fluency.
Okay, let's move from soft rejection to something a bit more dangerous. Subtle criticism. This can be deployed in a professional setting, and it can directly impact a project or, your reputation. The classic example is when you present a new idea, and the response you get is, "That's interesting."
The linguistic shield of interesting. It is one of the most fraught words in advanced English conversation.
It's a minefield.
It is. And the sources confirm that in many professional contexts, especially after a little pause, "That's interesting" is code for "I hate it," or "It's weird."
Or "I fundamentally disagree."
Or even, "I am trying to politely process how terrible this idea is."
But how do we avoid over-decoding? I mean, what if they genuinely meant it was novel or intriguing? The C2 learner needs tools to test that ambiguity in real time.
That is the essential skill. You cannot rely on the literal word. You absolutely must cross-reference it with the delivery mechanics.
The tone of voice.
The tone, the lack of enthusiasm, the hesitation. If the tone is positive, the speaker usually follows interesting with a clarifying positive, like because it solves problem X. If they just trail off,
the intention is negative.
Almost certainly.
So how does the C2 speaker test the ambiguity without forcing a direct confrontation?
You deploy a gentle, neutral probe, something that invites them to elaborate on the mechanism of their interest. You do not ask, "Do you hate it?"
Sure.
Instead, you ask something like, "What aspect of the design stood out to you most?" Or, "Can you elaborate on your initial reaction?" This forces them to either commit to a specific critique or commit to a specific positive point.
And their inability to provide either is the confirmation you need.
It's confirmation of the soft negative subtext. It's a very tactical deployment of language.
Okay, let's analyze another common phrase, one used for social engineering. The polite invitation that needs to offer an escape route. "You're welcome to join if you'd like."
This phrase is a masterclass in low-pressure communication. The speaker is fulfilling the social requirement of extending the invitation. That part is crucial for politeness.
But the key is that last part.
The closing conditional clause, if you'd like. That is the key. It signals a total lack of expectation or pressure.
It effectively communicates, "I have done my part by inviting you, but I genuinely don't mind if you decline, so feel absolutely free to say no."
Yes, and the C2 speaker understands that accepting this invitation when that conditional is present should only be done if they are genuinely eager to go. If they sense the host is just being polite, accepting might actually create social awkwardness.
You could be putting pressure on the host.
Oh, yeah.
Finally, we arrive at the most challenging decoding act of all. The emotional contradiction. Someone says, "It's fine, don't worry about it." But their body language, their tone, it betrays them.
They're flat, their jaw's tight, they're avoiding eye contact.
All the signals.
If the tone is flat, the situation is definitely not fine. At the C2 level, you learn that emotional sincerity, communicated through paralinguistics, trumps literal vocabulary 99% of the time in a personal conversation.
So the words, "It's fine," are just a shield.
A social shield. It's designed to deflect further inquiry because the speaker is either processing difficult emotions or is just unwilling to share them at that moment.
The synthesis here seems clear. Decoding these contradictions, listening with your ears, your eyes, and your intuition. That is the mark of someone who has mastered the social dynamics embedded within the language.
It's not just the grammar. You are moving past the literal text and into the unspoken contract between speakers. Let's pivot now from those subtle social dynamics to high-stakes transactional communication, the boardroom, the negotiation table, the academic defense.
Okay.
In these settings, power is communicated not through volume or aggression, but through structure and logic. So we need to focus now on structured persuasion.
This requires a total shift in mindset, doesn't it? You're not trying to win an emotional argument.
Hello.
You are trying to deploy a logical framework that guides the listener to your predetermined conclusion. They have to feel like the solution was inevitable based on the evidence you presented.
To succeed, you have to radically move away from subjective statements.
Yeah.
Simple phrases like, I think our plan is better, or I prefer X, they're just weak in professional settings.
Because they're so easily refuted.
Exactly. They're refuted by another subjective statement. You need objective language that frames your opinion as a conclusion drawn from evidence, from data, or from practical reality.
And utilizing key structuring phrases is the professional shortcut here. They signal to the listener that you've already performed a thorough analysis. So instead of a simple suggestion, you build a case that maximizes your perceived expertise. For example, one clear advantage of this approach is that it maximizes efficiency across 3 primary verticals.
That phrase instantly elevates your argument. It speaks to a quantifiable benefit efficiency, and it implies a structured system 3 verticals. You're using precision to confer authority.
And then you can add weight to it.
You add weight by framing the idea against reality. From a practical standpoint, considering the current budget constraints, it makes the most sense.
From a practical standpoint is so powerful. It subtly signals that you have already run the cost-benefit analysis.
It positions you as a strategic thinker who is grounded in reality. You aren't just pitching a fantasy, you're offering a vetted solution.
Right.
And there are other high-level structural phrases designed to do the same thing. They reference external data or objective reality, which makes them inherently harder to refute based on pure opinion. Think, based on what I've observed from the Q3 reports, or the evidence suggests that pivoting now will mitigate future risk. You are referencing an external authority, which is persuasive in and of itself.
Now let's tackle the tricky interpersonal communication of professional life. Giving negative or corrective feedback.
This is the big one.
Most C2 learners, I think, they fear sounding blunt or rude or overly critical, especially when they're addressing a superior or even a direct report.
And the foundational principle here is paramount. Always focus the critique on the situation, the deliverable, or the process, never on the person.
That is the key difference.
It's what differentiates constructive feedback from criticism. It just diffuses the personal element of the critique entirely.
So instead of the counterproductive direct critique like, you wrote this report poorly or your timeline is unrealistic, you soften the blow by externalizing the fault.
You shift the agent of the error. So, for example, instead of focusing on the person's failure, you focus on the object that needs improvement. One aspect that could be improved is the formatting of the summary section.
So the formatting is the issue, not the person who did it.
Correct. Or, to foster a more collaborative environment, you can frame the critique as a strategic invitation. Something like, have you considered trying a different approach to structuring the data flow?
That's good. It frames the critique not as a correction of a mistake, but as an invitation for higher-level strategic thinking.
And we also have to talk about the careful use of the feedback sandwich.
The classic.
The classic. When it's deployed clumsily, it just feels insincere. But when it's executed with precision and genuine examples, it is remarkably effective at maintaining morale while still achieving correction.
The key has to be sincerity in the positive statements.
It has to be. You must genuinely acknowledge their effort or a specific achievement. A skilled deployment might sound something like this. Your initial research effort here is clearly comprehensive, and with a few adjustments to tighten the proposed timeline, this proposal could be even stronger.
Let's break that down. You start with a specific, sincere acknowledgement of effort, clearly comprehensive.
Then you inject the corrective adjustments to tighten the timeline.
And you end with an aspirational positive statement. could be even stronger.
It's encouraging, it's precise, and it provides a clear pathway forward without damaging the recipient's self-esteem.
Okay, finally, what happens when you must fundamentally disagree with, say, a senior executive or a partner in a high-stakes meeting?
Yeah.
You need language that elevates the disagreement.
You need to elevate it to a sophisticated intellectual level, signaling engagement rather than just simple resistance.
And this is where specific terminology becomes a powerful professional tool. You don't just say, I think that won't work.
No, you elevate the discussion using advanced nouns and verbs.
For example, I understand the logic behind that, but I have some concerns regarding the long-term feasibility.
The word feasibility is instantly professional. It implies that you've moved beyond the philosophical merits of the idea, and you've considered the practical execution, the budget, the timeline, the human resources.
It demonstrates analytical depth.
It does. Or you could deploy high-level verbs of consideration.
Yeah.
While I acknowledge the potential benefits of the restructuring, I think we need to also weigh the potential risks associated with employee disruption.
Let's look at the power in those specific verbs. Acknowledge signals that you respect their point. You're not just dismissing it.
Right. And weigh positions you as a balanced decision maker. You are not arguing. You are engaging in a measured intellectual synthesis. The sophisticated deployment of words like acknowledge, weigh, and feasibility demonstrates an advanced command and dramatically elevates your professional image. Having navigated the transactional world of work, let's pivot back to the relational world of deep connection. We need to focus on what the sources call emotional granularity.
Granularity. That's such an insightful metaphor.
It is, isn't it?
Intermediate speakers tend to use the big buckets: happy, sad, angry. But to connect genuinely and to narrate complex human experience, you have to access the grains of sand.
The incredibly small, nuanced details of emotion.
And this is crucial for both personal relationships and for, writing or speaking with any kind of real narrative quality.
An intermediate speaker might say something like, I was sad when my project failed. A C2 speaker understands that sadness alone is just inadequate to describe that feeling. Was it a sustained philosophical sadness? Was it acute disappointment? Was it just exhaustion?
Okay, let's expand the lexicon of these basic emotions, focusing on the context that defines the nuance. If we start with sad, how do we get granular?
Well, you might feel disheartened. This implies a loss of courage or hope that's specific to a goal or an outcome. The sadness is active and it's linked to failure.
Okay.
Or you might feel melancholy. This is a more passive, sustained, often thoughtful, and almost poetic sadness. It's not linked to a specific recent event. And if the sadness results from constant effort, you are emotionally drained. The C2 choice you make depends entirely on your specific narrative purpose.
So if I lost a competition, I'm disheartened. If I'm sitting by the window reflecting on the fleeting nature of life, I feel melancholy. That distinction provides incredible narrative power.
It really does.
Okay, now for happy.
Happiness is notoriously broad. We have to distinguish between intensity and source. So you might feel content, which is a peaceful baseline satisfaction with the present moment, or fulfilled, which implies a sense of purpose is being met, usually from a long-term goal. If the joy is overwhelming and intense, you are elated. And if the satisfaction is more internal and reflective, you are quietly satisfied.
The C2 speaker can now specify, I wasn't just happy to finish the marathon, I felt fulfilled by the achievement and elated as I crossed the finish line.
Precisely. And our final basic one to break down, confused. This is often used to describe just intellectual or informational confusion.
So if the confusion is intellectual and challenging, I am perplexed.
Right. If it is extreme and bewildering, you are utterly baffled. And if the state relates more to your orientation, either spatially or in a social setting, you feel disoriented.
That distinction is vital. Contrast the simple statement, I was confused by his behavior, with the more nuanced, I felt perplexed by his contradictory statements.
The second phrase immediately signals a higher degree of analytical engagement. It allows the listener to trust the speaker's assessment of the situation more.
This granular lexicon is so crucial because the core reality of human experience is not monolithic. It's complexity. We are rarely just one thing. we often feel fundamentally conflicted.
And we need the language tools to articulate this internal complexity, especially intimate or therapeutic conversations. This is where the linguistic integration of opposing forces comes in.
Give me an example.
Phrases like, I'm excited about the new role, but I'm also incredibly apprehensive about the travel schedule. That perfectly captures the tension of anticipation mixed with situational fear.
Or using those beautiful compound emotional concepts, like describing an experience as bittersweet.
Bittersweet is a genius word because it simultaneously acknowledges the pleasure of a memory or an event, that's the sweet part, and the accompanying sorrow of its ending or its passing, that's the bitter. It's a linguistic shortcut for incredibly complex emotional processing.
And structurally, we need the sophisticated grammar to articulate this internal conflict clearly. It's that rhetorical structure of sort of splitting the self.
Exactly. Part of me believes the risk is necessary, but another part of me is terrified of the consequence.
That ability to articulate opposing internal thoughts, to linguistically sustain contradictory feelings without collapsing.
It's one of the highest markers of fluency and psychological maturity. It demonstrates not just vocabulary mastery, but the ability to analyze and articulate the human psyche in real detail.
We're now moving fully into the analytical language of the self. This section explores those advanced conversation topics revolving around why people change, how they grow, and crucially, why they so often resist transformation.
This is the language of deep reflection and empathy.
And it's often the content of high-level intellectual conversation, isn't it? Whether it's in psychology, literature, or just a deep late-night chat.
Absolutely. And to do it well, we must understand the core dilemma of human behavior, which is often rooted in the resistance to change principle.
And articulating that principle requires precise language. It's the understanding that people often prefer the comfort and the predictability of the known.
Even if that known is miserable or dysfunctional.
Right. Over the absolute uncertainty of the unknown.
That formulation itself gives the C2 learner such a powerful tool for analyzing any personal or organizational conflict. You are not just saying they don't want to change. You are saying their resistance is rooted in a fundamental psychological preference for known difficulty over unknown potential.
Which is infinitely more sophisticated.
Infinitely.
And to articulate personal development, we also need precise language for causation and turning points. We need narrative structures to describe those moments that fundamentally shift a life's trajectory.
And for the spark that initiates a transformation, we can turn to the language of chemistry. The term catalyst.
A catalyst.
Catalyst is the element that starts a reaction without being consumed by it. It's the perfect metaphor for a life event that triggers massive change.
So you can reframe a past negative event as the mechanism of growth. Something like, I didn't see it at the time, but looking back, the loss of that contract was the catalyst for our company's radical redesign and eventual success.
See, it transforms a failure into an essential generative event. And the resulting reflection also needs powerful, active phrasing. Instead of the simple, I thought about my goals, you use language that attributes transformative power to the event.
It forced me to fundamentally reevaluate my priorities and shift my long-term strategy.
Exactly that.
What's fascinating here is how much advanced English conversation has adopted the specialized vocabulary of therapy, self-help, and interpersonal psychology.
It really has.
These are no longer niche academic terms. They are necessary conversational tools for truly deep, empathetic discussions.
They are. If you cannot use terms like projecting or boundaries accurately, you are limited to a very surface-level interaction when you're discussing relational or psychological health.
Okay, let's delve into these key psychological terms. And we need more than a simple definition. We need to understand their conversational function. Let's start with the classic, projecting.
In a C2 conversation, the ability to say, I realized I was projecting my own professional insecurities onto my younger colleagues immediately signals an advanced self-awareness.
It replaces vague language like blaming others or getting mad at them.
It does. Projecting, in this context, is attributing your own unwanted feelings, your insecurities, or characteristics to someone else because it is psychologically easier to deal with them externally.
That is a profound tool for self-analysis. You are giving the listener a technical, analytical explanation for a very complicated emotional dynamic.
And consider boundaries. This term is crucial for discussing healthy relationships. C2 English requires you to be able to discuss setting boundaries, the rules and limits you establish to protect your mental or emotional well-being.
For instance, I had to set clear boundaries with my manager regarding after-hours emails.
That's a perfect example. It's analytical and non-confrontational language for managing personal time and workload.
We also hear the term triggers constantly, and this isn't just about initiating an action. It's about a very specific psychological reaction.
A trigger is a specific stimulus that causes an immediate, strong emotional reaction, one that's often rooted in past trauma or a significant past experience. The C2 speaker can acknowledge and explain this.
How so?
I realized his casual tone was a trigger for my past frustrations with unreliability. This moves the conversation from simple conflict to psychological understanding.
And let's not forget two terms that are so essential for managing high-pressure modern life: mental bandwidth and validation.
Mental bandwidth refers to your cognitive capacity or your emotional space for dealing with issues. It's a highly productive metaphor.
So you can say, I just don't have the mental bandwidth to take on this new project right now.
And that's a professional, non-emotional way to decline work based on your cognitive capacity.
And finally, validation.
Validation is the act of acknowledging another person's emotions, experiences, or thoughts as legitimate and understandable, even if you don't agree with them. I want to validate your feelings. It makes perfect sense why you would be upset by that decision.
It seems like the cornerstone of advanced, empathetic relational fluency.
It is. The mastery of these psychological terms equips you to discuss your internal landscape and the complexities of others, which is really the definition of true relational depth. We have arrived at the final frontier of fluency, the highest level of conversation focused on abstract thought and philosophical reflection.
This is the domain of deep inquiry, isn't it? Questioning fundamental human assumptions and articulating the search for meaning.
These are the conversations that define intellectual bonds. When you can dissect concepts that don't have a concrete physical existence like justice or meaning or time, you are signaling that you're operating at the highest cognitive level.
For example, a question like, is true happiness something we find externally, or is it fundamentally something we construct internally through deliberate practice?
To participate meaningfully in that kind of conversation, you must be able to articulate universal truths, these concise statements that summarize shared human experiences with real resonance. They are powerful conversational anchors.
I know what you mean. The kind of phrases that instantly create emotional resonance and agreement because they just capture a shared reality.
Yes.
Like at the end of the day, regardless of culture or wealth, we all just want to feel understood.
Or the realization that life is characterized by non-linearity. Life is rarely linear. It's full of unexpected twists and turns, and learning to trust that unpredictability is perhaps the hardest lesson of all.
That phrase acknowledges complexity, and it validates the struggle that so many people face with non-traditional paths.
In philosophy and in life, we spend a great deal of time grappling with uncertainty. We need phrases that can express a healthy, proactive relationship with not knowing what comes next.
It signals maturity over anxiety.
It does. You need to signal a proactive acceptance of ambiguity and an implied trust in the larger process. Phrases such as, I'm learning to embrace the unknown, recognizing that some of the greatest rewards come from unexpected directions.
Or the shorter, more pragmatic version, I'm trying to simply trust the process and see where the path leads.
Exactly.
And finally, the language of regret and the acceptance of the past. When reflecting on choices, advanced speakers often use highly specific grammar, the third conditional, to describe alternate, counterfactual realities.
The third conditional structure, if I had done X, Y would have happened, is linguistically essential for discussing regret. But the C2 application adds that reflective depth. Instead of just a simple, I regret my choice, you use this structure to explore the consequences of the counterfactual.
So you can compare a simple statement with this structure. If I had taken that opportunity in London 5 years ago, my career trajectory would have taken a dramatically different path, and I often wonder about the specific professional consequences of that decision.
Notice the emotional impact there. The use of, I often wonder about the consequences, moves the expression from simple regret to a sustained philosophical reflection.
And the classic reflective phrase is also vital here.
In hindsight, I would have handled that negotiation differently. The use of hindsight gives your reflection authority and distance. It suggests wisdom gained.
But the truly advanced reflection moves past the regret of the third conditional and into acceptance. It is the final, profound statement of coming to terms with who you are because of your past, not despite it.
That ultimate phrase of acceptance wraps the entire personal narrative into a moment of closure, But ultimately, those challenging experiences shaped who I am today, giving me a resilience I wouldn't trade.
Or, if you're focusing more on emotional peace, I've made peace with my past choices, recognizing that they were necessary lessons.
And that signals the end of internal conflict related to history and a full command of one's personal narrative in English. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Wow. We have covered an immense territory in this deep dive. We've moved through the entire infrastructure of advanced communication.
We really have.
We started by diagnosing the identity gap. We moved into decoding the subtle rejections in the boardroom, and we finally explored the nuanced vocabulary required to articulate existential philosophy and psychological growth.
And if your brain feels pleasantly tired right now, that is the best possible sign. It means you are not just passively receiving information, you are actively building new emotional and analytical frameworks within your mind.
You are stretching those linguistic muscles.
And definitively pushing past that C1 learning plateau.
I think the crucial takeaway here is this. C2 fluency is not a function of raw vocabulary size. It is about possessing the comprehensive tools, linguistic, structural, and cultural to express the full complexity of your human experience.
That's so well put.
You need language that can handle the nuance of your work, the honesty of your heart, and the complexity of your analytical mind.
We want to issue a specific challenge. For the next 24 hours, try to integrate just one specific advanced concept from this deep dive into your active vocabulary. Don't just recall a word use, a structure.
So maybe deploy the phrase from a practical standpoint.
Or define a boundary using the term mental bandwidth. Or articulate a mixed emotion using bittersweet or apprehensive.
You know, you, the listener, you are engaging in the hard work that most learners avoid. You are delving into the social, the psychological, and the philosophical code embedded in the language itself.
And that depth of commitment is a significant achievement that deserves massive acknowledgement.
Remember that the true goal of advanced language learning is ultimately self-realization. The ability to articulate your truth in all its conflicted, nuanced, and complex glory.
That is the ultimate reward.
Keep listening, keep reflecting, and keep speaking your truth.
Until next time. Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're a dedicated learner, someone who's, already fluent and is now looking at that final challenging climb to true mastery, then you know the difference.
You really do.
The difference between simply knowing a language and, owning it.
Exactly.
We are not talking about checking off grammar boxes today. We're talking about C2 mastery, the intellectual, the emotional, and the cultural intelligence required to operate at the absolute highest level.
We've been immersed in a really fascinating stack of source material today.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, these are notes that were gathered from a high-level advanced learner studio session. And our mission for this deep dive is to act as your ultimate shortcut. We want to cut through the noise, bypass all the textbook exercises, and just deliver the distilled insight into what the top 1% of learners actually focus on. It's a shift from mechanics to cognitive mastery.
Exactly. Our aim is to uncover the key cognitive and linguistic shifts necessary to achieve that nuanced, sophisticated level where you sound like a native-level thinker.
A thinker, not just a speaker. That's a great way to put it.
Right. A person who commands ideas, not just a person who can speak the language. We are defining the hallmarks of C2 fluency. The ability to handle the most abstract ideas, use the most sophisticated vocabulary, and crucially, navigate cultural subtleties like humor with, effortless grace.
And the material makes it really clear. Fluency is entry level.
Right.
Mastery is about intellectual agility, cultural command, and having the linguistic architecture for a long-term vision. So let's jump right into how mastery changes the way you actually structure your thoughts and conversations.
So the first core concept the sources really hammer home is this idea of intellectual agility. And this isn't just about how fast you can speak or how many words you know. It's about depth, control, and the ability to pivot seamlessly between really complex viewpoints.
That's the critical distinction right there.
Yeah.
Intellectual agility is defined in these notes as the capacity to discuss abstract, sometimes difficult ideas, to play with complex concepts.
And this is the big one.
And perhaps most importantly, in advanced discourse, to debate robustly without allowing the conversation to just degrade.
Into anger.
And to emotional hostility or personal attacks, exactly. It's about handling that high-stakes intellectual friction with total linguistic poise.
Okay, let's unpack the implications of that word, poise. Because when you're discussing highly conceptual territory, think deep ethical dilemmas, geopolitical strategy, or technological futures, the language you use has to be structured to contain that nuance.
It has to be.
If your linguistic framework is too rigid or it relies too heavily on simple declarative statements, the conversation it simplifies the complexity.
And that's where the misunderstandings come from.
Right. Or emotional responses. C2 fluency requires you to elevate the discussion above just, here's my opinion.
And the gold standard tool that the sources highlight for demonstrating this intellectual agility is the technique of playing devil's advocate.
Yes.
This technique immediately separates the masterful speaker from the merely proficient one, because it requires you to separate your personal conviction from the intellectual argument you're making.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. Playing devil's advocate is, like you said, so often misunderstood.
So misunderstood.
A lot of people assume it just means you disagree with what you're arguing against. But at the C2 level, it's a tool of constructive intellectual engagement.
Precisely. It is not an active disagreement. It is a method for rigorously stress testing the validity and the resilience of an argument.
Right.
By consciously introducing a counter perspective or exploring a potential weakness, you are demonstrating this comprehensive three-dimensional thought. You're showing that you're capable of looking at the issue from multiple, sophisticated, and often uncomfortable angles.
It sends such a powerful implicit message to your conversation partner. It says, I respect this conversation and your argument enough to examine its foundational strength.
I'm not here to tear it down.
Exactly. I'm not trying to tear it down. I'm trying to make sure its foundations are absolutely solid.
And the sources provide an excellent linguistic framework for how to do this gracefully, because you can't just suddenly switch sides.
No, that would be jarring.
It would. You need linguistic signaling. You need phrases that soften the counter-argument, things like, just to explore the opposing view for a moment. Or, a bit more formally, if we adopt a contrarian perspective, one might argue.
Those softening phrases are so crucial. They are what we call hedging phrases. The need for hedging at the C2 level is just immense, especially in professional or academic contexts.
Oh, absolutely.
Hedging lets you express caution or uncertainty or even disagreement without sounding definitive or confrontational.
Exactly. For example, instead of just stating your conclusion is wrong, a C2 speaker hedges. It'd say something like, while I appreciate the rigor of your analysis, I wonder if the data might lend itself to an alternative interpretation.
And that one word, might, changes everything.
It does. It removes the declaration of absolute certainty. Other key hedging phrases are things like, it seems plausible that, or there is some preliminary evidence to suggest. This is really the lubricant of advanced sensitive debate.
So let's use the main example from the source material, the discussion around artificial intelligence, because it just perfectly illustrates the cognitive and linguistic leap between a B2 and a C2 speaker.
It's a great example. So the B2 speaker, who's operating primarily in that realm of simple opinion and feeling, might just state, AI is dangerous.
Direct, unambiguous.
But intellectually closed. It offers no space for dialogue or nuance. It's a dead end.
The C2 speaker, though, immediately introduces conditionality, concession, and a highly abstract vocabulary set. The C2 example from the source is, while I acknowledge the efficiency AI brings, we have to consider the ethical ramifications of widespread automation.
Okay, now let's really analyze the structure there. It's not just the vocabulary like ramifications and widespread automation.
Yeah.
Look at the syntactic complexity. While I acknowledge X, we have to consider Y. This is a sophisticated dependent clause structure. It's called a concessive clause.
It's brilliant. The use of while I acknowledge immediately signals that the speaker can hold two opposing ideas in their mind at the same time, the benefit, which is efficiency, and the potential drawbacks, the ethical problems. This structural complexity is what allows the argument to have texture. The B2 speaker sees black or white, the C2 speaker sees shades of gray, and their grammar actually reflects that.
And furthermore, the vocabulary chosen ethical ramifications, it moves the discussion entirely out of the physical world and into the realm of abstract values and consequences.
Right.
Abstract vocabulary is the necessary scaffolding for C2 level thought. You can't deeply discuss things like justice or integrity or consequence without it.
So if that's the underlying structure, what about the architectural flow of the speech itself? The source material makes a specific mention of advanced structures needed for projection and theory testing.
Right, particularly hypothetical and complex conditional structures. Hypotheticals are the C2 speaker's projection screen. They are absolutely essential for modeling future scenarios and testing theories without committing to them as fact. The example given was, assuming for a moment that this technology takes over, how would society adapt?
That structure just forces a shared intellectual exercise, doesn't it? It invites the other person into a theoretical future.
It does. And we also see structures like inversion becoming more common in formal C2 speech.
Okay, can you give an example of that?
Absolutely. Inversion is a high-level stylistic choice that adds emphasis and formality. So instead of saying, if we had foreseen these issues, we would have acted differently, a C2 speaker might deploy a strong conditional inversion. Had we foreseen these issues, we would have acted differently.
Wow, that sounds much more formal.
It is. It's not just a stylistic flourish. It signals a higher, often academic, register.
And what about the passive voice? I know it often gets a bad rap in simpler writing, but it seems like it would be a crucial C2 tool in an abstract debate, especially for depersonalization.
Precisely. You hit the nail on the head. If you were discussing sensitive corporate errors or governmental policy failures, you don't want to point fingers, even implicitly. The passive voice allows you to focus the responsibility on the action itself, rather than the actor.
So instead of the government decided to ignore the warnings,
you'd say the warnings were unfortunately disregarded. The focus remains on the mistake, which allows the debate to be about policy, not about personality.
And this all ties back to those navigational tools, the key pivoting phrases. In theory, conversely, on the flip side.
These are the signposts. They guide your listener through this complex landscape of thought you're building. Without them, jumping from a primary assertion to a counter-argument just sounds disorganized.
Or even contradictory.
Exactly. Or contradictory. Using conversely, or on the flip side, clearly signals, I am now presenting a different but related perspective that I am also capable of processing. The listener recognizes that you are fully in command of the entire flow of ideas.
So intellectual agility isn't just about having the complex words. It's about using syntactic architecture and precise signaling phrases to maintain this high-level, emotionally detached and comprehensive debate.
It's the difference between merely possessing tools and being a master architect.
Yeah.
So having navigated the rigor of intellectual agility, we now have to transition to the absolute necessity of cultural intelligence, or CQ, at the C2 level.
Yes.
The source material is adamant about this. Knowing every single grammar rule is completely insufficient if you fail to grasp the cultural context in which the language operates.
That failure leads to linguistic isolation, doesn't it? You might articulate a perfect sentence, but if you constantly misread social cues or you use inappropriate formality or miscultural references, you will always remain on the periphery.
You're an outsider.
You're an outsider. Language mastery requires understanding the social contract, the cultural operating system that guides native communication.
And this leads us to the ultimate cultural acid test, what the sources call the final frontier of advanced language mastery. Humor.
Ah, humor, the hardest part.
It really is. If you can spontaneously understand, appreciate, and deploy humor correctly, you have achieved true cultural integration.
It's so difficult because it's inherently fast, it's layered, and it relies entirely on shared cultural context and history. We're not talking about slapstick, we are talking about wit, that quick, clever, verbal agility.
Which demands instantaneous, high-level listening and cultural processing. It's not just about understanding the words, it's about understanding the gap between what is said and what is meant.
Yes, the subtext.
The subtext. So to dive deeper, let's look at the example the sources provide regarding specific humor styles. The material highlights British humor as a masterclass in subtlety.
Okay.
Characterizing it as dry, sarcastic, and crucially, self-deprecating.
Self-deprecation is such a fascinating cultural tool, and it's one that trips up so many advanced learners because they often take it literally.
That you do.
We need to define self-deprecation not just as making fun of oneself, but as a social strategy.
It is a profound social lubricant, especially in high-context cultures like the UK. The intent of self-deprecation is really complex. It establishes modesty, it preempts criticism by acknowledging your own flaws first, and most importantly, it disarms other people.
How so?
By playfully minimizing yourself, you signal that you are not a threat, and you make others comfortable.
Okay, so the source's example. Saying, I'm not exactly Einstein, isn't a deep dive into genuine personal failure.
Got it all. It's a modest, funny deflection. If you were a C1 learner and you heard that, you might internally wonder, why are they confessing their lack of intelligence?
Right. Should I feel sorry for them?
Exactly. The C2 speaker understands the subtext. The speaker is managing the room, injecting some lightness, and expressing a very accepted form of cultural modesty. Taking that statement literally means missing the entire social transaction.
But the sources also implicitly warn against universalizing humor. Not all cultures value self-deprecation equally. Let's maybe contrast that British style with a more direct style, like the prevalent humor style in the US.
That's a vital point. Where British humor often involves that ironic understatement and making oneself the butt of the joke, American humor often leans more toward observational comedy, exaggeration, and, depending on the context, a more direct, sometimes assertive wit.
So in some professional American settings, too much self-deprecation might actually be read as a lack of confidence.
It could be. And that's a key cultural difference the C2 learner has to navigate. They need to understand the cultural scale of modesty required for the situation.
This brings us to the broader topic of cultural skills, specifically direct versus indirect communication styles, which really dictate how politeness is communicated through language.
This is fundamental CQ. In a high-context, indirect culture, the C2 speaker has to be an expert at reading between the lines. They use softeners and indirect questions.
So instead of fix this report immediately.
Right. They might say something like, I wonder if we could perhaps revisit the phrasing on page 3 if you have a moment.
Which is a very polite order.
It is. Conversely, in a low-context, direct culture, that excessive softening can sound evasive or uncertain. If you use too many hedging phrases in a high-speed, direct business environment, you might be perceived as lacking conviction.
So C2 mastery is being able to instantaneously switch registers depending on the culture and the conversational partner.
Absolutely. The ability to switch between those highly formal inverted structures we talked about earlier and culturally appropriate informal shorthand, that shows mastery over both syntax and cultural expectation.
Okay, so now let's address the linguistic gatekeepers that just defy literal translation. Idioms. They are the ultimate test of cultural immersion.
They really are. They are the linguistic history of a culture, all wrapped up in these non-literal phrases. If a speaker relies on word-for-word translation, idioms become completely insurmountable.
The sources gave 2 excellent foundational examples, but for a true deep dive, I think we need a few more.
Let's do it.
Let's start with the first one they mention. Address the elephant in the room.
This idiom is about discussing the obvious, sensitive problem that everyone is aware of but is actively ignoring. Its cultural power signals necessity and courage, the acknowledgement that avoidance just isn't sustainable anymore.
So when you use it, you're not just describing a situation, you are performing a decisive move within the social dynamic.
You are. And the second one, let's not beat around the bush.
A classic.
A classic call for directness and efficiency. It just means get straight to the point without delay or unnecessary preliminaries. But mastering the appropriate timing and tone for these phrases is key.
Because using let's not beat around the bush in a very formal, indirect setting might actually be culturally offensive.
It could be, which highlights the need for CQ alongside the vocabulary.
Okay, let's add a few more complex idioms that require deep cultural knowledge. What about one dealing with effort or resources?
Okay, how about to throw good money after bad?
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's a profoundly idiomatic phrase about resource allocation. It means continuing to spend money on something that is clearly failing or already lost, which just makes the situation worse. It captures a specific concept of futility that would take multiple literal sentences to explain.
Or one relating to a pivotal moment of truth or clarity.
How about to call a spade a spade?
Yes.
This is all about honesty and clarity. It means speaking plainly and truthfully, even if the truth is harsh or uncomfortable. It's an idiom you'd frequently use when urging directness in a meeting where people are being evasive.
So the ultimate outcome of mastering these culturally specific phrases is bonding. It creates an instant insider feeling.
You move beyond just communicating functional information, and you start participating in the culture's highly efficient shared shorthand. This allows for connections rooted in implicit understanding, which is really the definition of C2 intimacy. You're sharing a sophisticated, implicit understanding of the world with another person. This cultural command turns a fluent speaker into a participant.
Okay, so we've covered intellectual rigor and cultural fluency. Now we have to address the linguistic demands of long-term purpose and ambition, what the sources are calling the language of legacy.
This section highlights a really profound cognitive and psychological shift that dictates your linguistic choice. The sources are clear. Advanced speakers instinctively move the discussion away from the active present day, what are you doing?
Right.
And they move toward the much more profound and structurally impactful question, what are you building?
That pivot from action to building is fundamental. Doing implies tasks, short-term activity, or maintenance. But building immediately implies long-term construction, permanence, structure, and a lasting result that exists beyond the immediate moment.
So when you start framing your life or your work in terms of building, your language has to immediately adapt to express that long temporal horizon.
Exactly. And this need to articulate a completed future outcome demands mastery of a very specific, high-level grammatical structure, the future perfect tense.
The language of projected achievement.
Yes. I think we need to do a deep dive into the future perfect, because while it's taught relatively early, it is often underutilized or incorrectly simplified by learners who just assume the simple future will work.
That's a great point. The future perfect is necessary for discussing legacy because it shifts the focus not just to an action that will happen, but to the result of the action, viewed retrospectively from a specified future date.
So it allows you to project backward from a future achievement.
Yes, which makes the goal sound definite and integrated into a life plan.
Let's use the source examples, but let's also contrast them with simpler forms to really illustrate why the future perfect is so much better for talking about legacy.
Good idea. Let's take the first example. By the time I'm 50, I hope to have established my own company.
Okay.
The focus is on the state of completion. The company is a concrete, established fact at that future point. If you were to say, by the time I'm 50, I will establish my own company, it sounds like the action starts then, not that the result is already realized.
That's a huge difference. And the second example, which truly embodies this concept of permanence. I want to have created something that outlasts me.
If you try to phrase that ambition without the future perfect, you immediately lose rhetorical power. I want to create something that outlasts me.
It's fine.
It's functional.
It's functional.
But the insertion of "have created" frames the entire ambition as a completed, achieved legacy. It lends immense weight and conviction to the statement.
Now, a crucial point the sources didn't explicitly cover, but which advanced learners often ask is, does this mean I should always use the future perfect when I talk about the future? Don't native speakers often simplify?
That's an excellent and necessary challenge. And yes, in casual speech, natives often default to simple future or the present progressive.
Right.
However, when you're discussing high-stakes professional goals, personal philosophy, or legacy, precisely the topics C2 speakers engage in, reverting to the simple future, makes the speaker sound less definite, maybe even less serious about the long-term goal.
So the future perfect asserts commitment to the result.
It does. It's a conscious choice of register to emphasize conviction and foresight.
Let's also touch on its subtle cousin, the future perfect continuous. How would a C2 learner use that to talk about sustained effort toward a legacy?
The future perfect continuous adds the dimension of sustained effort leading up to that future point. For legacy discussions, this is incredibly powerful, you might say. By the time I retire, I will have been working on climate policy for over 3 decades.
So that emphasizes the endurance, the continuous dedication.
Exactly. It reinforces the weight of the achievement. It's not just the result, it's the journey to that result.
So moving beyond the tense itself, discussing this long-term purpose requires a specialized vocabulary, the vocabulary of self-actualization.
Yes. The sources single out key words that move discussions from transaction to transformation: fulfillment, alignment, and contribution.
These are words for abstract self-reflection.
They are. They're required to define these internal states and your relationship to external goals.
We see the shift in the phrasing.
Yeah.
So instead of saying, I want a promotion, which is very success-focused, a C2 speaker talks about how they are trying to align my career with my core values.
Alignment implies a deliberate, harmonious, internal and external state that's achieved through intentional choices. It reflects a much deeper level of self-awareness. It moves the discussion from a superficial desire for status to a profound understanding of inner drive. And similarly, discussing one's contribution immediately frames the individual within the wider world and society, connecting their personal ambition to a broader benefit.
This philosophical focus brings us to a really powerful distinction the source material makes: the difference between achieving success and achieving significance.
Success, as it's often measured, is often personal, quantitative, or status-driven, climbing a ladder, hitting a monetary goal. Significance, however, is about impact, influence, and permanence. It's about how your life or your work affects the broader ecosystem after you step away.
So the language reflects this. The goal, as the source noted, shifts. It's not just about success, it's about significance. The C2 speaker is rhetorically focused on impact, not just achievement.
That's it.
What stands out here to me is that articulating these profound life goals requires not just technical vocabulary, but also comfort and vulnerability. And that vulnerability has to be expressed using accepted linguistic forms.
You need phrases that can articulate large dreams without sounding boastful or naive or unrealistic. They have to be grounded expressions of an inner drive.
So, for example, phrases that articulate internal motivation, like, I'm driven by a desire to make a meaningful contribution.
Exactly. Or the universal sentiment, which in this context isn't a cliche, but a structural necessity.
Yeah.
I want to leave the world a little better than I found it.
These phrases are the necessary architecture for sharing that profound purpose. They signal that the speaker is deeply engaged in the philosophical why of their life, not merely the what of their daily tasks.
The discussion of legacy requires a linguistic toolset that is equal parts structural precision, like the future perfect and rhetorical conviction, from that vocabulary of purpose.
We've established that C2 fluency demands intellectual depth and cultural intimacy. Yet none of that is sustainable, especially at this frustratingly high level without the correct psychological foundation.
Which the source material defines as resilience.
Right.
Resilience is vital for life, but it is specifically critical for the advanced language learner. And why is that? Because the closer you get to the top, the steeper the marginal gains become.
Oh, that's so
The gap between your near perfection and the native ideal shrinks, yet that tiny gap becomes incredibly frustrating because the feeling of being almost there just never quite goes away.
This psychological hurdle is precisely why the source material so wisely introduces Simon Sinek's concept of the infinite game. We need to connect this idea directly to language mastery to provide the C2 learner with some psychological relief.
The infinite game perspective is a complete reframing of the learning process. Sinek describes a finite game as having clear rules, clear players, and a finish line. You win or you lose. Language learning, particularly to mastery, is an infinite game. There is no finish line. You don't win English. You simply keep playing, adapting as it evolves. The goal is not victory. It is to sustain the game indefinitely.
That is truly revolutionary for a C2 learner who has spent their entire journey working towards a perfect score or a final certification.
Of course.
They get so frustrated, as the source mentions, because they desperately want to be done.
By internalizing the infinite game, C2 speakers can manage that desire for closure. It allows them to view mistakes, which are inevitable, even for natives, not as failures, but as simple, necessary data points in the ongoing process.
So errors at this level are feedback on subtle, complex nuances.
Not proof of fundamental incompetence. Exactly.
So if the C2 speaker is focused on continuous iteration rather than perfect closure, how do they handle the inevitable verbal stumbling blocks or slight missteps? The sources dedicate a lot of time to the techniques of graceful self-correction.
This ability is perhaps the most subtle marker of native-like ease. When someone at this level stumbles, they don't descend into panic or stop the flow or obsessively apologize. They use natural linguistic tools, these corrective phrases, that prioritize communication continuity over perfect delivery.
Okay, let's detail a few of these and focus on the conversational dynamics they create.
Let's start with acknowledging a poor word choice. Let me rephrase that. This is excellent because it explicitly signals to the listener that the previous wording was inadequate, but the idea itself is solid and is forthcoming.
It maintains trust and conversational momentum.
It does. And what about acknowledging a slight structural error? The simple and effective. That didn't come out quite right. This acknowledges the error with grace, immediately mitigating any confusion, and it often elicits a slight, shared understanding from the listener, allowing the speaker to try again without any embarrassment.
What about those momentary cognitive slips when a specific high-level word is just, for a moment, inaccessible? The mental blank.
The C2 speaker uses universally understood and accepted phrases to manage those delays. If they interrupt their own flow while constructing a complex thought, they can smoothly say, "I've lost my train of thought."
Which is a mechanism that just requests patience.
It requests patience without disrupting the overall meaning of the exchange.
And the most classic phrase for a lexical retrieval delay.
It's on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah.
This is the perfect linguistic tool for demonstrating that the knowledge is there, but the physical retrieval mechanism is temporarily jammed. Crucially, these are not weaknesses. They are linguistic tools for sustaining an advanced conversation under pressure.
We also have to address the linguistic management of intellectual fatigue. Resilience also means managing burnout and the overall sustainability of the effort, using language to negotiate your boundaries.
That's so important. Advanced learners often work demanding jobs and engage in demanding intellectual pursuits in the language. They have to internalize that knowing when to rest is just as critical as knowing when to push. But they also have to know how to articulate that fatigue across different registers.
Okay, so let's contrast the informal phrases provided in the sources with a more formal, workplace-appropriate equivalent.
Informally, with a friend or a close colleague, a resilient C2 speaker uses a metaphor for energy management. I need to recharge my batteries, or for severe fatigue. I'm running on fumes. These are vivid, native-like expressions that convey exhaustion.
But if they are negotiating a deadline with a supervisor in a formal setting, those metaphors might be perceived as too casual.
Precisely. In a more formal setting, the resilient speaker would use a more measured, professional register to articulate capacity limits. I need to prioritize tasks to ensure I can maintain optimal performance, or something like, my capacity is currently saturated and I need a brief period to consolidate.
So the mastery here is choosing the correct linguistic armor, the correct register, to protect one's boundaries and manage one's energy efficiently.
This level of resilience, linguistic, psychological, and physical, is what allows the C2 learner to sustain their fluency across decades without crashing. It's the infinite game strategy applied to self-management. So this has been a really intensive deep dive. We've moved from the intricacies of concessive clauses and abstract debate all the way to the psychology of shared cultural humor.
The architecture of legacy and the philosophy of the infinite game.
It's a lot.
And that's the achievement we need to pause and acknowledge for you, the dedicated learner. If you are still with us, you have just consciously exposed your brain to high-level, unsimplified English that deliberately tackles complex ideas about human cognition and culture. You chose challenging growth over easy entertainment, and that speaks volumes about your drive.
It really does. We want to reinforce the crucial mindset shift that's articulated in the material.
Yeah.
Stop viewing English as a subject you study a finite game with chapters and tests.
Right.
Start viewing it as a medium you live in, the air you breathe intellectually, the filter through which you process a complex reality.
And redefine the purpose of your learning. You need to go beyond merely passing tests or achieving a certification. Learn English to truly connect, to persuade, to leverage complex linguistic structures, to understand deeper, nuanced truth.
And to share your unique story with the world in all its intricate complexity.
Yeah.
Own your voice. That confidence is the final essential layer of C2 mastery. The sources remind us that your accent is not a flaw. It is the journey made audible, a stamp of where you came from. Your mistakes are not failures. They're the necessary data points of continuous growth. Your voice is unique. It should be earned, asserted, and deployed with intellectual agility and cultural sensitivity.
As we conclude, the ultimate test of all this high-level knowledge is putting it into immediate practice.
It has to.
It must move from theory into physical, conversational action this week.
So I want to leave you with a final provocative challenge that tests both your vocabulary and your intellectual agility in a high-stakes setting.
Okay.
Find a conversation this week at work, in a debate club, or just with a thoughtful colleague that involves a complex ethical or strategic issue. And then, intentionally, deploy one of the most intellectually demanding phrases we discussed.
Which phrase are you nominating for the ultimate C2 application test?
No. Use the full expression. Allow me to play devil's advocate for a moment. Assuming for a moment that this opposing viewpoint holds true, how would that fundamentally shift our conclusion?
Wow.
This forces you to immediately use a conversational softening phrase, an argumentative technique, and a hypothetical structure all in one go. Test your agility. That is how you cement C2 mastery.